Jack Mitchell was known for his passion for motorcycles and his taste for danger. At age 30, he lived in New Jersey with his wife Melissa. She, often worried, warned him about the dangers of his illegal racing, but Jack always downplayed the risks. "Don't worry, Mel. I have everything under control," he would say. Jack worked as a mechanic in a small local repair shop. His work was routine and safe, but what really motivated him was the adrenaline of night racing. For him, the motorcycle was not just a vehicle, it was an extension of his own soul. His relationship with Melissa, although loving, began to suffer due to his obsession with racing. She knew he had talent and passion, but the constant fear that something would go wrong consumed her. "One day, you'll regret it, Jack," she warned, fearing the worst. Jack had few friends outside the racing world. His social circle revolved around other motorcyclists who shared his love of speed. They met every Friday night to participate in clandestine competitions, always looking for the next big challenge. For him, life off the track seemed dull. He always believed he could stop whenever he wanted, but week after week he kept running. His mind was always focused on the next turn, the next obstacle. Melissa, in turn, tried to keep the peace at home, but the fear of losing Jack was always present. She often dreamed of the worst, but still loved him enough to continue supporting him, hoping he would see the danger before it was too late. On this particular Friday, Jack was more confident than ever. The sky was clear, and the track he and his friends chose looked perfect for a fast, adrenaline-pumping race. It was a route he already knew well, but that night would be different. The group gathered at the starting point, adjusting their bikes and discussing the details of the race. Jack smiled at his friends as he put on his helmet, feeling the familiar butterflies that always came before a big race. The race started as usual. Adrenaline coursed through his veins as he sped up, feeling the wind hit his face and the roar of the bike beneath him. For Jack, it was like flying. He was in control, or so he thought. When the first sharp curve appeared, Jack leaned in as he always did, but at that moment something went wrong. The asphalt was more slippery than expected. The rear tire of his motorcycle skidded, and he lost control. In a second, Jack was thrown from the bike. Everything around him seemed to slow down as he was launched into the air. He saw the ground approaching quickly, but he felt no pain at the moment. Everything was silent. His friends stopped immediately, running towards him. "Jack! Jack!" one of them shouted. They knelt beside him in despair as he remained motionless on the ground, with his eyes closed and his body in an awkward position. As his body remained on the ground, Jack felt a strange feeling of weightlessness. He opened his eyes, but what he saw confused him. He was no longer on the ground. Somehow, he was floating above the scene, looking down at his own body. "What's going on?" thought Jack. He looked down and saw his friends panicking, trying to wake him up. "Am I dead?" he asked himself, but there was no one to answer. Time seemed to not exist at that moment. He floated above the road, observing the scene with an eerie calm. Something inside him said that this wasn't the end, but at the same time, he didn't know how to go back. Around him, the world looked different. The colors were brighter, the sounds more distant. He looked up to the heavens and saw light in the distance. The light was warm and inviting, but Jack didn't know if he should follow it. "You still have a choice," a calm and serene voice echoed in his mind. He didn't know where the voice was coming from, but he felt like he wasn't alone. "What are you going to do?" the voice continued. Jack started thinking about Melissa. He could feel her desperation, even without being physically present. "I can't leave her like this," he thought, feeling a growing pressure in his chest. But the light in the distance looked so tempting. Suddenly, the environment around him changed. Jack was no longer floating above the road. Now he was in a dark tunnel, but at the end there was a bright light. He began to walk, feeling drawn to the light, even though he didn't know what he would find there. As he walked, flashbacks of his life began to appear. He saw his childhood, his first days with Melissa, his marriage, and even the moment he bought his first motorcycle. Each memory seemed more vivid than the last. "You've already done a lot," the voice said again, now closer. "Are you ready to leave this behind?" Jack hesitated. He knew the choice was in his hands, but how could he decide between moving forward or going back? Suddenly, he saw Melissa in front of him. She was crying, desperate, holding his hand, but he couldn't touch her. "Come back to me, Jack. I need you," he heard her voice echo in his mind. Fear began to take over Jack. What if he didn't make it back? What if light was the end of everything? He wanted to fight, but the peace he felt in that tunnel was so tempting that it made him question whether he should continue. "The choice is yours," the voice repeated one last time. Jack closed his eyes, trying to feel what really mattered. "Melissa," he whispered, as a tear ran down his face. He knew what he had to do. Suddenly, everything went dark. Jack felt a sharp pain in his chest, and then a rush of air invaded his lungs. He opened his eyes and saw his friends surrounding him, relieved. "Jack, are you okay?" one of them asked in a shaky voice. He couldn't speak. The pain in his body was overwhelming, but the feeling of being alive was even stronger. Jack looked up at the sky and saw that the light had disappeared. He was back. Paramedics arrived quickly, and he was taken to the hospital. As the ambulance drove through the streets, Jack could hardly believe what had happened. He felt that he had experienced something much bigger than a simple accident. At the hospital, Melissa ran to see him. Her eyes were red from crying, but when she saw him awake, she smiled with relief. "I thought I lost you," she said, holding his hand tightly. "I almost left," he replied, his voice weak but full of emotion. He wanted to tell everything that had happened, but he didn't know if Melissa would believe him. Still, he felt like something had changed forever. Over the next few days, as Jack recovered, he reflected on what he had experienced. The light, the voice, the tunnel, it was something impossible to describe in words, but he knew there was a reason he came back. Jack spent weeks thinking about what had happened during the accident. The feeling of peace and the choice he had to make never left his mind. He knew this wasn't just a dream. Every day, the idea that he had been given a second chance at life grew stronger. He could have died on that road, but something, or someone, brought him back. Racing, which had once been his greatest passion, now seemed unimportant. Jack was beginning to see things from a new perspective. "I can't keep living like this," he thought, feeling the need for change. Melissa, in turn, was always by his side, helping him recover. She knew Jack had been through something profound, and although he didn't share all the details, she could see the change in his eyes. "You're lucky, Jack," the doctor said at a routine appointment. "Few people would survive such an accident. Maybe it's a sign that you should slow down." Jack agreed silently, knowing it wasn't just luck. What he had experienced during those moments between life and death marked him deeply. Jack knew he couldn't live like he used to. When he was finally released from the hospital, Jack returned home, but his life was no longer the same. He spent days reevaluating his priorities. The bikes, which used to take up all his time, now seemed less important. Melissa noticed the change in him. "You look different," she said one night. Jack smiled and, for the first time, confessed to her what he had seen and felt during his near-death experience. "I saw you, Mel. I knew I needed to come back for you. I couldn't leave you like this," he said, with tears in his eyes. Melissa, touched, hugged him, relieved to finally understand what he had been through. Jack also began to realize how much he had neglected his relationship in search of an adrenaline rush. He decided it was time to change, not just for himself, but for Melissa and the future they could still have together. The motorcycle, which was once his symbol of freedom, now seemed to represent risks that he almost never came back to tell about. "I think it's time to sell this," he said to Melissa. She smiled, knowing that decision meant a lot. Jack began to value the simple moments in life more. Walk with Melissa, spend time with friends safely, and even enjoy your workshop in a different way. Over time, Jack found new ways to express his passion for motorcycles without putting himself in danger. He began working in motorcycle safety, teaching young motorcyclists about the dangers of illegal racing and the importance of riding responsibly. His social circle has also changed. The friends who once encouraged running now seemed distant. Jack became close to new people, who shared his new outlook on life and supported him on his journey of change. "You've really changed, man," one of his old friends said during a chance meeting. "I never thought you'd quit racing." Jack smiled. "Life has shown me that some things are not worth the risk," he replied calmly. Now, Jack used his experience to inspire others. He began giving talks at motorcycle events and even in schools, telling his story and warning about the dangers of clandestine racing. In one of those talks, he said, "I had a choice in that tunnel. I could have moved on, but I turned back because I realized that life still had a lot to offer me. And that starts with making better choices." Jack knew his story could save lives, and that motivated him to continue spreading his message. He felt that this near-death experience was not just a warning, but a second chance that he needed to honor. One night, while talking to Melissa about his plans for the future, Jack realized how much he had neglected his own life story. He began to reconnect with old friends and family he hadn't seen in a long time. "You're more present," his mother said at a family gathering. "I like seeing that side of you. I think that accident did you good, in a way." Jack smiled, knowing there was something true in those words. He also began to appreciate the time he spent with Melissa more. Small gestures, like preparing dinner together or watching a movie, became special moments. He had learned to value the present. Jack realized that, for a long time, he had been running in search of something that had always been in front of him: the love of his wife, the support of his friends, and the tranquility of a simple life. "You were my anchor, Mel," Jack said one night. "I could have lost everything, but coming back to you is what kept me alive." Melissa hugged him, feeling that they had finally reached a point of peace. Now, with his new perspective on life, Jack was more determined than ever to live each day with intention. He knew that the past could not be changed, but the future was still in his hands. Years after the accident, Jack continued to live with purpose. He had turned the near-death experience into an opportunity for growth, both personal and spiritual. His work as a mechanic continued, but he now also led a community group of motorcyclists focused on safety and responsibility on the roads. He used his story as a tool to inspire others to make better choices. Melissa and Jack, finally at peace with the past, began planning a family. "We are ready," he said, confident that this new phase would be lived with the wisdom acquired in the most difficult moments. Jack never forgot what he saw during the experience. The light, the voice, and the choice he had to make. He knew it wasn't just luck that brought him back, but a bigger reason that he now understood perfectly. Life after near death brought clarity. Jack began to see each day as a new opportunity to be better, love more, and live fully. His journey had been tough, but he emerged stronger and more aware of his choices. When reflecting on everything he's experienced, Jack always told himself, "I'm alive for a reason." And the best way to honor that is to truly live, without fear, and with an open heart. A year after his accident, when everything seemed to be falling into place in Jack's new life, he began to experience strange pains in his head and constant fatigue. Initially, he thought it was stress, perhaps a result of the long hours in the workshop. However, Melissa insisted that he see a doctor. Reluctantly, Jack made an appointment. After some routine tests, doctors decided to do an MRI to investigate further. What they found was shocking. There was a small tumor in his brain. Tumor? Jack repeated in disbelief, looking at the doctor. But I feel fine, other than this fatigue. The doctor explained that although the tumor was small, it needed to be investigated urgently to determine whether it was malignant or benign. Melissa, at her side, held Jack's hand tightly, her face pale with worry. "We'll get through this too," she said, trying to sound confident, but the fear in her eyes was evident. Jack remembered the feeling of peace he had experienced during his NDE. Had that been an omen? Could it be that the second chance he received was on short notice? The thought haunted him for days. Subsequent scans showed the tumor was benign, but its location required delicate surgery. Jack would have to face another battle for his life, one that didn't involve high speed, but the surgical precision of human hands. The news of the surgery shook Jack in ways he didn't expect. He had already faced death once, but this time was different. It was not an accident, something sudden and out of control, but rather a conscious choice to enter the operating room knowing the risks. Melissa was by his side at every appointment, but he could feel the fear rising within her. "What will we do if something goes wrong?" she asked one night, her eyes filling with tears. Jack, not knowing how to respond, just hugged her. The days leading up to the surgery were filled with reflections on his life. He thought back to the near-death experience, the visions he had, and the choice he made to return to Melissa. "Am I being tested again?" Jack wondered. His friends, old and new, visited him to show support. "If you went through the accident, you'll go through this too, Jack," said one of his old racing friends. But Jack knew that the speed this time was in the hands of others, and that scared him. The night before the surgery, Jack sat down with Melissa and wrote a letter. "If anything goes wrong, I want you to know that you are my anchor, my reason for coming back," he said, handing over the letter. She refused, refusing to believe it would be necessary. However, Jack knew he needed to prepare for any outcome. He had learned to value every moment of life after his NDE, but now, faced with yet another threat, the uncertainty was overwhelming. On the day of the surgery, the hospital seemed colder and scarier than Jack remembered from his last visits. As nurses prepared him for the procedure, he tried to remain calm, but his heart was racing. He had faced death before, but this was different. Melissa was by his side until the last moment, holding his hand tightly. "Come back to me, Jack," she whispered, repeating the words he heard in his near-death experience. He tried to smile, but the fear was greater this time. As the anesthesia began to take effect, Jack felt reality slowly fading away. "Here we go again," he thought, as his vision darkened. The last thought he had before losing consciousness was of Melissa, waiting for him on the other side. During surgery, Jack again felt like he was floating outside his body. He saw the doctors operating, the steady rhythm of the machines monitoring his vitals, but there was something more. The same light he saw during his accident was there, in the background, brighter than before. This time, he did not feel immediate peace. Instead, there was a sense of urgency, as if he were being called upon again to make a decision. "Do you really want to go back?" the familiar voice echoed in his mind, but with a different intensity. Jack hesitated, the same doubt returning. "Why is this happening again?" he asked himself. And then, he saw Melissa's image again, but this time, there was something different about her. She was holding a baby. Jack didn't understand what he was seeing. Melissa, with a baby in her arms, smiled at him with a tender look. The scene was so real that he could almost feel the warmth of the small body in his arms. "Is this my future?" he thought, confused. He had never seriously discussed having children with Melissa. It was something they always left for later, especially with all the changes after the accident. But now, he found himself faced with this vision, a possibility he had never considered. The light in the background came closer, and again he heard the voice, "You have a choice, Jack. This is the life that awaits you. But you must decide." Fear and doubt took over him. Was this real, or just an illusion created by your mind? Jack wanted to believe he still had something to fight for, but what if it was an illusion? What if he didn't survive the surgery? Uncertainty weighed on him more than anything else he had ever faced. "I want to see that future," he said to himself. The vision of Melissa and the baby was clear in his mind, and the desire to return began to grow within him again. "I'm going to fight for this," he decided, with more conviction than he had ever felt. With that decision made, Jack felt his consciousness move away from the light. The scene slowly faded, and he felt the familiar pain of his body, the doctor's voices in the distance, and the sound of the machines bringing him back. Jack slowly woke up, his mind still confused by what he had seen. His eyes were heavy, and the hospital lights seemed blinding. He heard voices in the distance, but the first one he recognized was Melissa's, calling his name softly. "Jack, you're okay," she said, her eyes watering with relief. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry and his mind was still spinning from the events he had experienced during the surgery. As he regained consciousness, the image of the baby still lingered in his mind. He looked at Melissa, wanting to ask about what he had seen, but he didn't know where to start. He wondered if this was just a dream or a real message. The doctors entered the room and gave the good news. The surgery had been a success, and the tumor was removed without complications. "You'll make a full recovery, Jack. You just need time," the surgeon said. Melissa, upon hearing the doctor's words, breathed a sigh of relief. "I knew you'd come back to me," she said, squeezing Jack's hand. He smiled at her, but the vision he saw during surgery haunted him. Jack wanted to believe that this was more than just his mind creating images, but now, with life before him again, he needed to find out what that vision meant and how it would change everything from now on. Over the next few days, as Jack recovered in the hospital, he couldn't stop thinking about the vision he saw of Melissa and the baby. He felt a growing need to talk to her about what he had seen. "Melissa," he said one night as they talked about the future, "I need to tell you something. During surgery, I saw a vision of you, and you were holding a baby." Melissa looked at him, surprised and hesitant. She was silent for a moment, and Jack realized there was something more. "I was going to wait until you felt better, but I think now is the time," Melissa said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm pregnant, Jack," she said, her eyes filling with emotion. "I found out a few weeks ago, but with everything that was going on, I didn't know how to tell you. And after the surgery, I just wanted you to get well first." Jack was shocked, unable to speak for a few seconds. The vision he saw wasn't just a dream, it was real. The baby he saw in Melissa's arms was his son. I saw that, Mel. During the surgery, I saw you with our son," he said in disbelief. Tears streamed down Melissa's face. "I knew you would come back to us," she said. Jack, moved, hugged Melissa tightly, feeling that everything he had experienced had led him to that moment. The revelation of Melissa's pregnancy brought a new wave of emotions to Jack. He had survived a terrible accident, endured delicate surgery, and was now about to become a father. "Are we ready for this?" Jack asked one night as he and Melissa talked about the future. They had been through so much together, but the idea of bringing a new life into the world still felt surreal to him. "We are stronger than ever," Melissa replied, with confidence in her voice. "We've been through so many difficulties, Jack. This baby is our future, our new chance to build something even greater." Jack began mentally preparing himself for fatherhood. He knew that for a long time he avoided greater responsibilities, but now, after everything he had been through, he felt more prepared than ever to face this new challenge. He also began to see his near-death experience and surgery as signs that he still had a lot to live for. The second chance he received was not just for himself, but for his soon-to-be growing family. With each day that passed, Jack felt more connected to life, to Melissa, and to the future that awaited them. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face whatever came. After his recovery, Jack began to rethink his priorities once again. He decided to sell the workshop and start something new, something that was more aligned with his new purpose in life. "I want to be there for our son," he told Melissa. "I want something that allows me to be at home, more connected to you and our family. I've taken too many risks in the past. Now, I need to be here." With Melissa's support, Jack began studying to become a motorcycle safety consultant, teaching other riders how to avoid the same mistakes he made in the past. It was a way to use his passion in a positive way, without the risks that almost cost him his life. He also began working with support groups for young motorcyclists, sharing his story and warning about the dangers of illegal racing. "Life is too precious to be wasted on unnecessary risks," he said in the lectures he gave. Melissa, now more at peace with Jack's choices, fully supported his new career. They were ready to start this new phase of their lives with the baby's birth approaching. Jack felt a sense of completeness that he had never experienced before. He was alive, he was happy, and he was about to be a father. His second chance had turned into something even bigger than he ever imagined. Finally, the day arrived. Melissa went into labor, and Jack accompanied her to the hospital. He was nervous, but more excited than ever. This would be the conclusion of everything he had seen and felt in the last few months. As he waited in the hallway, Jack couldn't help but think about everything that had happened. His near-death experience, the surgery, and now, the arrival of his son. Everything felt so connected, like it was destined to happen. When the baby's cries echoed through the hospital room, Jack felt indescribable relief. He entered the room and saw Melissa smiling, holding her son in her arms. It was exactly like the vision he had during surgery. "It's a boy," said Melissa, excited. Jack, with tears in his eyes, walked over and looked at his son's small face. "I saw you before you were here," he said softly, holding the baby gently. Jack knew that that moment sealed everything he had experienced. He had a chance to come back to life, to make better choices, and now he was being rewarded with something much greater, a new life in his arms. With his son in his arms, Jack realized that, despite all his doubts and fears, he had chosen the right path. Life gave him a second chance, and he was determined to make the most of every second. Jack's life changed completely after the birth of his son. He felt that everything he had experienced had prepared him for this moment, and now, he was ready to face the future with a new perspective. He and Melissa quickly adapted to the new routine of being parents, and Jack made a point of being present at all times, from diaper changes to sleepless nights. For him, every moment was a blessing. Jack never forgot the vision he saw during his surgery. He knew that this experience was not just a coincidence, but a way to prepare him for the future he now lived. He continued his work in motorcycle safety and speaking to young riders, but his priority was always his family. "I've lived enough at high speeds," he said. "Now, I want to live life at the right pace, with the people I love." Jack and Melissa began planning new dreams together, knowing that what they faced made them stronger. The near-death experience and surgery had changed everything, but they had also opened doors to an even brighter future. Now, with his family by his side, Jack knew his life had a new beginning. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away.